Welcome, everybody. I'm Justin Sasso, President and CEO of the Colorado Broadcasters Association. We really appreciate all of you coming out, and of course our friends and partners at Rocky Mountain PBS for making today possible. According to an article in Forbes earlier this month, Millennials took over as the largest generational group in the United States workforce in 2015. And by 2020, they will make up over half of the total workforce. There are many stereotypes surrounding the millennial generation, and while Gen Xers and Boomers like to hurl some of them around over casual conversation, the Gen Xers and Baby Boomers suffered their fair share of labels before they came to where they are today. As I was researching this topic, I found it interesting to learn that there's a quiet conflict brewing in our organizations. Boomers are working longer than the generation before them, for some out of necessity. Gen Xers feel stuck in middle management, and they're waiting for the Boomers to move out of the way so they can rise to higher levels. And then you have the Millennials who are sitting at the entry level or intern level with little hope of moving up in their career because of the two generations that are in line ahead of them. Combined with the input of our members and this discovery, I was excited to find a solution that might help us better understand the differences between each of these generations while teaching our members how to manage across this dichotomy of personalities. That same Forbes article I mentioned earlier states, leaders who prepare and plan for this generational shift will find their businesses at a tremendous advantage in terms of recruitment, retention, and success. And here to help us prepare and plan is instructor Scott Van Ness of the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs College of Business. Scott has over 25 years of experience leading organizations, research, and higher education with millennials. Scott has a wide range of millennial experiences working with millennial airmen in the U.S. Air Force to the corporate world, where the majority of his hires were millennials, and he spent over 4 years conducting academic and evidence-based research on multi-generations in the workforce. It's my pleasure to introduce Scott Van Ness, presenting one of 6 series in the multi-generational workforce management.
Right. Thank you. All right, thanks, Justin. All right, I'll stick up here. Thanks. All right, good morning. A quick plug for what we're doing and how we set this up. And I am from UCCS and from the College of Business, but our Office of Professional and Executive Development is an arm of the university that reaches out to businesses and helps them solve issues like this, adjusting to a multi-generational workforce. These are non-credit courses, but it's designed to help businesses with a specific need. They're custom-built courses for whatever businesses might go through. And we've delivered this multi-generational workforce seminar to a lot of businesses in Colorado Springs through the Better Business Bureau there. And so we've run this out, and it's gotten a lot of traction. So that's kind of where we're going and where this is being delivered from. All right, so who are the millennials? That's what we're going to talk about today in our first series. And again, I'm Scott Van Ness, and I'm an instructor of operations management at UCCS. So we're going to go through that. And people have heard a lot about this, and they probably have a lot of questions. Now, how we'll run the seminar today is I want this to be an open forum where people ask questions, but if you do ask a question, I'm going to repeat it so it can be taped, but we want you to do that. There will be a session at the end for questions and answers for sure, but if something comes up that you're interested in, you want to talk about, absolutely, and that's the joy of customized education here. I want to give you what you need. That's the idea behind it. All right, so this is our areas we're going to talk about today. I'll do a quick introduction, and then I'm going to give you an introduction on the workforce generations. I heard some discussions at the start of the class about what workforce generation we're in. Am I a quasi-millennial, sort of kind of Gen Xer? And there's some interesting information about that. One thing we'll find is there aren't real solid, hard lines, like this date means you're this or that. It's a lot more subtle than that, and there's a lot of issues that we'll kind of go through that. So we'll talk about workforce generations, who the millennials are. And one thing I always have to make sure in these sessions is these can turn very quickly into gripe sessions about millennials. It can go that way. I think this group will be great on that, but that's something that it is an interesting topic. There is a lot of consternation, so we want to make sure that we stay on a positive note there. This is important too, how workplace generations actually look at where they work and what's involved with that. And it's quite a bit different, and that really gives us an understanding of where people are coming from, because the view of the workplace has changed quite a bit over the years. And finally, are millennials good for your team? And they are. We're definitely going to talk about that today. We want to make sure they know that. And finally, some motivation strategies that you can use. Our goal is always in this series is, yeah, this stuff is research-based. We're a university, we dig that stuff up. But my goal is always to give business leaders, organization leaders, tools that they can use on the job. And we're not relevant if we don't do that. So that's critical. And my pledge is you will get real life tools to work with here on what's working and who's doing some things. All right, so just a quick background on me. I'll let you look at this. I'm not really a core academic. I came from the business and leadership world. I went to academics very late in life. I am working on a PhD, haven't finished that yet. But I was brought into UCCS as what we call a professionally qualified instructor. We have research folks and they're academically qualified, and then they want a smattering of folks who have worked in the field. And my background is operations and supply chain management. That's like moving stuff, making stuff. That's what I do. That's my core background. And when I go to leadership examples, that's where I'll usually dig from. I was a U.S. Air Force officer for 21 years. I'm a retired lieutenant colonel. I worked in supply chain management logistics. And then I did that for about 5 years with Target Corporation. I did distribution operations and supply chain. They move a lot of stuff, Target does. That was real interesting seeing how the government did it and then how the private sector did it. And it was definitely an eye-opener. And then I'm a small business owner. My wife and I own a company called National Loan Clearinghouse. And we're a loan brokerage, and we work with small businesses, and we line them up with private lenders to help them grow. And that's right. The banks still aren't loaning money right now. Small businesses need to grow. There are private lenders that want to lend money, and we're kind of the go-between on that. So it's a relationship kind of driven businesses on both the lender end and the company end. So that's my background. How I kind of got started in this issue with millennials, in the introduction they talked about my time in the military with airmen and young officers. And I remember a conversation right at the end of my career before I retired from the Air Force. I was talking with a young officer, a lieutenant, and I was showing him what the career path was. And if you're not familiar with the military, it's a pretty set career path. You do certain things, you go to classes, and then you move up this chain, and everybody does it. And so through the mentoring session, my young officer said, very clear, yeah, it looks great, but I don't want to do that. It's like, what do you mean you don't want to do that? That's what we do. And he's like, that's not me. You work too hard. I don't want to do that. I want to do my own path. So that was my first introduction to it. And I saw there was definitely a change on the horizon. And how we react to that and respond to that, I really wanted to get back and think about that before I responded and realized that there was definitely some changes among the mix. When I went into the corporate world, things were quite a bit different. And because I was an experienced manager, I got to mentor young managers right out of school. And that was really interesting on how they viewed the workplace. And so I'm digging through this stuff and I'm compiling these things. And I'm coming up with some pretty good strategies that work with that. But one thing I noticed in that environment, especially in a core supply chain operation, pretty hard production environment, they weren't hanging around. It's like, this is an awesome job. I'm like, no, it's not. This is not for me. So that taught me there. And then I started teaching classes at UCCS part-time. They brought me on full-time about 3 years ago. And then I really saw it. So I've had a good background on this from a professional business owner and now a university instructor on this. So it's been really interesting, and I'm looking forward to sharing that based on what I've seen. So this is our learning objective, what we're going to try to do today. The bottom line is the workplace is changing, and to stay competitive, we've got to be able to not just manage millennials, but to manage a workforce now with 3, 4, in some cases 5 generations. We've seen some big changes with that. And there are companies that are doing this really well. There's some that are not doing it real well. We'll talk about those and kind of see what's going on there. But that's the idea. So bottom line today, at least in this first session, we're going to talk about the millennial workforce, understanding them, and coming up with some strategies initially to work with those folks. That's the idea behind it. So let's go ahead and get started. This is what our workplace generations look like. And the lead-in from Justin talked about this, but we can have as many as 5 workplace generations. People are living longer and they're working longer. We see CEOs of companies into their 80s and they're still going strong. They're not retiring, they're hanging around. So some of the generations, we can see the names on it. And the thing that I will caveat on is these dates of birth. It fluctuates from study to study. The American the APA has not said, yea, verily, boomers start at 1960. It flows a little bit, 60, 61, 62. What we found is how you were socialized, how you were raised, what generation your parents are from, how you grew up probably impacts that. So we've had boomers who think like millennials. We have millennials who think like traditionalists. So we don't want to knothole everybody. And sometimes when we call people millennials, they'll say, I don't want to be called a millennial. We're going to have to do that today to kind of keep things straight. So that's the idea behind it. So we see our GI generation, most of those folks are definitely getting up there in years. Traditionalists are the silent generation. They grew up in the Great Depression and World War II, and they were pretty quiet about things. They put their nose to the grindstone, figured things out. If your parents were from that generation, you may have a lot of those characteristics. And that may, you may not be a perfect fit in your workplace generation. And then we see the boomers, the big group there. They show this 46 to 64. Some people cut it off at 60, 62. Like I said, that's kind of what goes on there. And they were influenced by the JFK assassination, civil rights. You see the things on there, the moon landing, that kind of stuff. And I was born at the tail end of the boomers, so I'm kind of like, I saw that stuff that they talk about there, but I was really young, I remember the Vietnam War, but I was a little kid. So my connection to those is probably going to be a little less. And if you're from that workplace generation, that's a big group, and it's socialized quite a bit different. And then we see our Gen X. We call them the most neglected generation. And they're kind of in the middle between the boomers and now the millennials are pushing on them. And they're not getting any bigger. They're just in the middle of that group. And they were the first latchkey kids. A lot of their parents might have been traditionalists, and so they have a different view of things than maybe the millennials. They saw the Challenger explosion, the Berlin Wall come down. Many of their parents were divorced. They grew up in single parent households, latchkey kids. And they saw MTV, unfortunately, or fortunately, depends on how you want to look at that. I grew up looking at that too. All right, and then the millennials are a big group, and they put that age area around 82 to 2000. It can be early as 80, but they have different names, Gen Y or Gen Y. In some cases, we've heard that. Echo boomers, it's interesting where it talks about the 9/11 attacks. Boomers that grew up before 9/11 and remember things before that, that's kind of a foundational norm, but people who grew up after 9/11, they see this as the norm in the world. And so there's a big difference in the millennials, how they see things by those events. So we can't stereotype too much here. Social media, of course, is a big thing, and then bad things like school shootings. That's norm for this generation. They've seen that their whole lives. And then this group they call iGen or Gen Z, they're just starting to go into the workplace right now. We're starting to see them, and they're called homelanders, screeners. They've grown up during the Great Recession, and terrorism's kind of a norm for them. But it's interesting on some of the studies what we're seeing with them. They're going back to playing board games and they actually talk to each other. There's some interesting things there. So when they get in the workplace, we see a lot of them. It's going to get really, really interesting. So that's kind of our generations at a glance, what it looks like. So in 10 years, they're saying it might look like this, where it depends on how many boomers are going to stay in the generation. And this adjusts by type of work environment. Some work environments, these numbers are all over the place. So and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, but that's what we're looking to see. The questions that we're going to look at down the road is, the Gen Xers, that number is not really going to change. They're there. It's only going to go down. It can't go up, right? They're already in the workplace. How many of the boomers are going to stay around? Working into their 70s, 80s. Some of them have parents that are still alive. So there's a lot of issues there as this changes. So all the rules that we've seen in the past on retirement and progression, they're out the window now. And so businesses, organizations are struggling with this right now in terms of how they develop people and how they move them along, because this is just different. So we got some work to do here in this area. All right, so just a sidelight here as an operations supply chain guy, this is something that's being impacted right now. I talked to my students about this at UCCS. U.S. right now is short 70,000 truck drivers. 70,000 truck drivers, that's a lot. And they're paying lots of money to drive trucks right now, but millennials don't want to do that. How come? What's going on? Isn't that a cool job? And I asked my students, and they're like, no. But I said, well, they'll let you bring your dog along. They're letting them do that now, so that's something that might interest people. But truck drivers are probably making more than our grads out of the College of Business at UCCS right now, because it's just a need. And this is kind of going and melding into the second here. 69% of construction craft positions are unfilled. And that's from the Association of General Contractors. We're starting to build homes again in this country right now. You can see the prices of homes are definitely going up. Has anybody bought recently? Okay, if you've seen that, we're definitely seeing a change in the market there. So with that, this is something I read just recently. Construction craft positions are unfilled. They're starting to build homes. When we stopped building homes, where did the construction workers go? Where do you think a lot of them went to work? They were. Actually, some of them are. So that's because so now that they're going to build homes, the truck driving industry is going to get hit again here. So, and that impacts the supply chain, getting stuff to market. We're seeing this cycle. So what happened here? What kind of drove this and what was going on? And we had an interesting discussion before this. In the last, let's say 10 to 15 years, public education changed its focus, and they try to encourage all students to have a chance to attend college. I teach at a college. A lot of these students should not be at college. I can tell you that. But they're there, and they were encouraged to do so. And trade jobs that pay a lot of money, electricians, plumbers, HVAC repairmen, they weren't encouraged to go into those jobs. And so that's been impacted by this. These industries have a lot of old-time boomers that are in those jobs, and there isn't even anybody for them to train. So what are they doing to combat it? They're paying more and more and more. So that's what's going on there. So that's a real challenge. So as hopefully the economy continues to rebound and we start to build homes, build again, we're going to see slowdowns because of this. Might see issues with quality of work, that kind of thing, and then the trucks aren't going to be able to deliver stuff on time. So these are all impacts of our changing workplace generations. That's definitely a factor. So what can we do about this? This is something I asked my students about. Does anybody know who that guy on the right is? Okay, who is that? The Maytag repairman, right? Yeah, it was like he was the loneliest guy because nobody repaired Maytags because they always worked. And that's the old Maytag repairman. It was an actor named Jesse White. They got a new cool-looking guy now that's doing it, if you've seen on the shows now. But the idea is I asked my students about this, and they said it's not about the money. They know that they can make more money maybe driving a truck or being an electrician. But the bottom line was these jobs suck. That's what they told us. This is not what I want to do. And I asked, well, why? And the concern is they said, well, truck driving is kind of a lonely job. You're out by yourself. You don't get to interact with people. You probably shouldn't be updating your Facebook while you're driving an 18-wheeler, dragging gasoline across the country, things like that. That's an issue there. Not a healthy lifestyle. They're looking at that, and you look at truck drivers. Maybe that's not what they want to do. The truck stops don't have natural foods, stuff that you buy at Trader Joe's or Whole Foods or something like that. So that's the challenge, and they didn't really have an interest in it. They're away from home a lot. So that industry is struggling because of that, but that was a question on that. And then plus, these industries drug test too, and that's another issue with this and some of the issues with legalization of marijuana. Truck drivers have to test regularly. It's not something that you can get around. It's just a reality of it for insurance purposes. So that's kind of what we're up against right now and some of the issues that we're seeing. So who are the millennials? Who are they? What are they about? So a little research on this says some ideas and things that they believe in. Some of the stereotypes are they're anti-business, and that's not really the case. What we found is 75% of millennials believe businesses. They might think that they're mostly focused on their own generation, but they still think corporations have a positive impact on society, providing goods and services that people need to make their lives better. That's the idea behind there. So there's you see a trust issue right away here with this workplace generation. There's some distrust of big organizations. We're going to dig into that in just a few minutes. So let that kind of sit in. And when separated based on social media use, 83% of millennials considered to be the most socially connected believe businesses have a positive impact. So the more socially connected they are, the more positive view they have of business. And they're using it differently than definitely I am. We'll kind of dig into this. But that's one of the stats that we've seen, and I thought that was pretty interesting in terms of what that impact might be and where they're seeing things. All right, so a lot of discussions right now about millennials maybe not being happy in jobs. And if in your industry, have you had issues with millennials that are leaving quickly in jobs? Okay, I see some heads nodding there. Unhappy with things, right? Okay, so definitely some issues with that. So that's the idea. So why are they unhappy? That's the first thing. They're saying only 28% of them think their current employer is making full use of their skills. And we talk a lot to employers at UCCS and the College of Business. We spend a lot of time asking them about these things. And I'm getting this feedback as we put our grads into the market. They're talking about these things, and that's a concern. And usually a lot of the business leaders are saying, look, it's going to take 2, 3, 4, 5 years before you're going to get there. And this skill set is not developed yet. So be patient. One thing, though, we have seen is millennials really get the importance of leadership. The definition might be a little different, but leadership is considered to be a big driver in whether people stay or go. And that's something we talk a lot about in my classes at UCCS. It always comes back to leadership. It's always going to be a factor there. So they understand the importance of leadership, but they think there are more skills that they can bring to the table that aren't being recognized if they just use me. If they would just allow me to do what I want to do. That's the idea. Half of them said the skills they learned when employed were more useful than what they learned in higher education. Ooh, so that's a poke in the eye to the university system. And it's something that I've taken to heart. I try to really, really bring real world examples and ideas to my students so they are prepared to go out there, but this is still a challenge. So that's another issue in getting an idea of where they're coming from and what they think. So far we've talked about things. They're not as anti-business or anti-work as we thought. They do want to move up. They do have good feelings about corporations, but there's still some mistrust about big organizations, big issues. That's an idea behind it. All right. So what's important to them? What are they looking for? So we saw this stat here. It said a third of millennials would choose employee well-being, growth, and development as top priorities if they were in charge. And that's a good amount. The rest of those numbers really fell off from there. That was the high mark on that survey, was about 33% are saying, yeah, that's important too. What do we mean by well-being, employee well-being? Go ahead if you. Happiness maybe? Okay, so happiness with the job? Work-life balance. Ooh, that's an interesting one there. Okay, so we hear a lot about that. So those are issues that I can tell you, work-life balance, we didn't worry a lot about that in the military. Your work-life balance is, yeah. So those are challenges. And those are things I had to learn about as a leader when I went into corporate world, because it was definitely a little bit different. And they talk about development and learning and growing and going to classes and getting those things. And that's a pretty big gripe we hear right away, is within the first 1 to 5 years, I'm not being developed, I'm not being grown. And that's a challenge that we're seeing. In the last 15, 20 years, our business organizations changed in their structure. I remember when organizations had a lot of middle management and the org structures were pretty tall. We flattened them all out with technology. So the growth positions that they used to develop people in are not there anymore. So as leadership, we've got to work harder to develop, because they're not going to move into formal titled positions with that going on. And then another thing, a criticism of millennials is they said they've been accused of being self-centered. We haven't seen that before, have we? That's an issue there, but me first. But this generation thinks prioritizing personal growth and development shouldn't be discouraged. And maybe in my workplace generation, we're like, dude, you need to learn your job first. We'll worry about that later. I need you to be able to do this. I need to be able to manage your team. and then that got kicked to the side. That employee may have been looking for that, and it might have been one of the reasons why they didn't hang around, is because we didn't develop during that process. So this is real. This is something that they are concerned about. Now we can take the attitude of, yeah, well, who cares? You know, they need to suck it up. On the other hand, they're leaving, and they can leave right now too. That's the other issue. So development's going to be critical, and we need to push that up front. That's something that definitely we're looking to do here. All right. So another thing with millennials, I don't think we would disagree with that, but it says nearly half of them say they would prefer to hire new employees based on professionalism, teamwork, and creative thinking versus what? Skill or experience. Are skill and experience overrated? No? No, I say no, it's not. There's some things where, you know, I definitely want doctors who are skilled. We don't, yeah. He's a great team member, but, you know, yeah.
So I have a question here, because there seems to be a bit of an inherent conflict.
Yep.
With that, right? I'm of that liberal arts, you know, you get the broad degree, and
Right.
which is that, the teamwork, creative thinking, think about a lot of things. And yet, at 10 years old, a 10-year-old today is expected to know what they want to be doing at 25, and their
Yeah.
whole junior high school, and everything. It's like you have to know, and there's no opportunity for deviation.
Okay.
That's a bit of almost like a built-in conflict.
Yep. So, and I'm just going to repeat that so it gets taped on here. But the question was, we've got kind of a conflict here. Children today are getting programmed at age 10 on what they need to do. There's kind of a career path set for them. Some of that's the parents' fault too. In some cases, what schools they're going to go to, what they're going to do. But in this case, they're saying something different. They're saying this is important: professionalism, teamwork, and creative thinking. And this is actually an interesting viewpoint on this, because what we found is the organizations that are performing better, we can't get past experience in some cases, but if you worked with experienced people that you can't get along with, or maybe who aren't creative, and so the human resource industry, who works in HR in here? Does anybody work in HR in here? Okay. So what we've seen in a lot of cases, they're going to a lot more behavior-based interviews. They're asking questions about, how would you react to a situation like this? Tell me about a time you had a disagreement with a boss or coworker. Those questions really talk to this and get that in place. That way I can find out if they are going to be a good fit. They don't ask as much about experience or skills anymore. You wouldn't be in the interview if you didn't have that. Now I got to see how you fit. And we've learned this from the millennials. This is something that we've actually picked up from them, is I need a cohesive team. I need a group that does this. To get questions or to get a feel about professionalism, teamwork, and creative thinking, who should do that interview, you think? The team, yeah, the coworkers. And so the organizations that are kind of grabbing onto this, they're seeing that they want to see a lot of interviews from the team you're going to work with. And if you've been through those, they're the hardest interviews of all. They really will work you over, because they want to see if you're going to fit. They have to work with you. Management, human resources, yep, good fit, go in there. Then when they get them in, they're like, oh no. So if you've got a chance to see if somebody really can fit with a team, and in this industry, teams that have to work together a lot, long hours, difficult challenges, you got to see what they're about. And so that's what we found, that behavior-based interviews really help with that. So that's something we could do. So I'm looking for a fit. I want people who are creative. I want people who are good team members. What does that look like? And you might see it in a workplace. Sometimes you know what it doesn't look like. That in some cases, that's a lot easier. So digging in on that with behavior-based interviews really helps in that. And they say if they were in charge, that is, but millennials think current senior leaders place more emphasis on leadership skills when hiring new staff. Leadership's important, isn't it? We want leaders, but they might not be hired into a job where they are leading. So I need someone who's going to be productive right now. And if we're focusing on leadership, that may not be it. And sometimes, well, you probably work for leaders who aren't all good team members. Yeah, the heads are nodding up and down on that one. Okay, that happens in some cases. So you got to have, we used to say in the military, you got to have followership before you have leadership. That's a term we used to use, and that's kind of an idea there. So the candidate qualities millennials agree with senior leaders on as being important is they're looking for general business and academic knowledge, And then they threw this thing out. This is really important. Entrepreneurial skills. Entrepreneurial skills. What is that? What do we mean by entrepreneurial skills? Is that a bad word? I hope not. Okay, so we see, no, not. So what's a good entrepreneurial skill? What are we looking for there? Innovative thinking. Okay, so definitely we want people to innovate. And that's where we look for that creativity, solving problems within that group. What else is a good entrepreneurial skill? Risk takers. Okay. You don't want to take too much risk, but you want people who aren't afraid to do things. And that, again, that's where the behavioral-based interviews really, really help a lot of times. If you ask an employee, a potential employee, tell us about a time you disagreed with a company policy or procedure. And in the case if the answer is, well, I didn't do anything, I just followed the rule, you might not want that person. You want somebody who's going to challenge that, who's going to be creative. So entrepreneurial skills, even in public broadcasting, are still good things because they're pushing the envelope. There's a creativity there. And in some environments where that is not a rewarded skill set, those folks don't hang around. They're not looking for that. And you might lose somebody that's going to really do some good things for you. So that's some ideas on who the millennials are, definitely. All right. So why do you think there's an issue with leadership as being identified as a key factor in hiring? What's wrong with that, using that as a key factor? We want to build leaders, don't we? What might we miss if we're just going that way? Yep.
I guess I could see an employee who's just getting out of university faced with this expectation that they're going to need to be of that leadership quality, and yet we're not going to put them into a leadership position, and we're also not going to pay them the level of pay that they have aligned in their brain with, hey, I just came out of school with $100,000 debt, right?
Yeah.
And you want me to be a leader, and yet you want me to start at the bottom of the ladder.
Okay, so I'm going to try to rephrase that so we get that. So the idea is we have a little bit of a conflict there. We may have even trained our students at a university to be leaders. They're hired as a leader. They're coming into a job with a mountain of student loan debt. A lot of them are now. And yet they're going into a job where they won't lead. They may not lead for a long time. So we've missed there. So that's the connection. In the taller organization structures, that made sense. In the flatter organization structures, it really doesn't anymore. We've got to develop the doing skills, the operational skills it takes to do those jobs. We want a good fit. We're going to train them how to do that, and then we need them to be productive. And then we need them to stay too. Yep, I'll get to you there. Go ahead.
It's also how you define leadership. You don't have to be in a stated position of leadership to be a leader. And
Right.
I don't know how much awareness or nurturing there is of being a cultural leader, being, a cheerleader. all
Good
those
point.
other things.
So the definition of leadership might be different. It may not be in a position where you are, quote, a manager or a leader or a supervisor. You could be a cultural leader or a section leader or a project leader. That's a tough sell for millennials right now. It is. So the nurturing part is important. That's a good point, definitely. Question back there.
I think there's also possibly, everybody wants to be the news director, nobody wants to be the reporter.
Okay.
So there's a little bit maybe of, I want that title, or I want that prestige, or...
Yep. At a very young age, too.
I literally get people applying for senior news positions, and they have not done one bit of reporting.
Okay. So the statement question there is kind of a misalignment. People will want to be the news director, not the on-scene reporter that's got to stand out in the snow by 25, or get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and ride with the snowplow guys, or however that works. Somebody's got to do that. And because of that, people who are putting in for positions that they're nowhere qualified for, but because they feel like they've earned that going in. No one's told them, in some cases, you're not qualified for this. You are a long ways out. And we don't like to do that. In a lot of cases, we don't want to tell people no. But somewhere along the line, they have to kind of get that cold bucket of water. Somebody's got to do those jobs, and they're important. They're important for their development. We just got to keep delivering that message and making that happen. All right. So we've talked a bit about kind of the issues that we're going up against, and we talked about who the millennials are. One thing we kind of wanted to dig into next is, sure, okay. want to talk into how workforce generations actually view the workplace, kind of what's involved there, and what are they seeing in what they look at. And this is something that became really, really clear to me in having mentoring conversations. I've done a lot of mentoring over the years, and asking open-ended questions and really, really listening and kind of digging into it. So there's some different viewpoints. So this is actually from a Staples survey. I like Staples. They actually deal with business people. They talk about these things. So the first thing it says, they reveal their workplace preferences. And it says 5, and it says that's the number of generations employers are managing today. And it talks about who are the most prevalent. It says 34% of millennials are more inspired at home, while Gen Xers and baby boomers find inspiration at the office. That's why they want to work from home, maybe, or people like that. I'm not inspired at home. There's too much going on. In a lot of cases, people are agreeing with me on that. But in some cases, depending on what their life is, it's totally different. They're more inspired at home, which means they might be able to work from home. They check their email at 2 in the morning. You get emails from folks at 2 in the morning, like, what are they doing up? Well, that's what they're doing. They're looking, they feel inspired. So that's interesting. 48% of baby boomers agree they'd like more natural light in the office. This is an issue we're dealing with right now in terms of building work centers that are collaborative. And natural light is something people look for. I teach in a classroom where there's no windows, thank goodness, because they'd be looking out the windows. My office doesn't have any windows either. I'm kind of used to that. But is natural light important to you? Is something you want? Okay. Yeah, definitely. So we're in agreement on that. That's something that a lot of the workplace generations want. And we're starting to see offices being built with more windows, and we're getting out of cubicle land, that kind of thing. That's going on. Over 40% of Gen Xers and Millennials prioritize fresh foods for wellness as an issue. And if you have cafeterias in your area, they're looking for fresh food. Is it available? It's something, we actually made a commitment to this at UCCS, where we have a goal that our food providers actually use a certain amount of locally grown products. And that's actually been a winning point in attracting students. This is something organizations that maybe have cafeterias on site need to advertise this, because this is important to a lot of folks. 48% of boomers want ergonomic furniture as part of wellness programs because our backs hurt from lifting too many things over the years, but ergonomics are important. Having desks where you can stand up. Anybody got one of those stand-up desks? Yeah, no way. But it's actually supposed to help. So we're seeing that. And 38% of Xers and 35% of millennials rank salary as their number one motivator, whereas the Gen Yers or the millennials don't. Salary becomes, I'm looking for that. That's number one. It's a fairly high percent. So salary is important. 46% of boomers are motivated by having a sense of purpose at work. That's pretty much in line with what we see with millennials. That's a common thing there. There's a sense of purpose. What am I doing? What's the mission of my organization? What's involved there? And 50% of millennials say that burnout is making them look for another job. Millennials are leaving before they actually get to burnout. But burnout becomes an issue. So, and we talk about that where you're literally done, you're wiped out. That's a factor. So there's some different viewpoints here where things are quite a bit different, but you can see there's a lot of common ground here in sense of purpose at work, natural light. Ergonomics are good for everybody, right? No one wants to be uncomfortable. So that's all good stuff. Ergonomic furniture is expensive though. Yep.
Has there been any sort of studies how these generations change?
Oh, we're gonna give you a mic here. Okay, awesome.
Okay. Has there been any studies on how things change? I mean, when I have a radio, TV, film degree. Clearly, I didn't care about money when I went to college. It's more important to me now,
Right.
but I went to a business college, but majored in radio and television.
Awesome. Okay.
So I'm just curious about millennials, if they're sort of, I mean, of course they don't, I'll generalize, maybe they don't care so much now because they don't have kids, they don't have a house, they don't have a mortgage.
That's a good point.
They're not taking care of parents,
Yeah. Did we lose our rose-colored glasses over the years as life became? Yeah. So there hasn't been any long-term studies with millennials yet. Maybe they haven't gotten jaded yet, but they went into the job market. Maybe I'm going to simplify this, less jaded than the other workplace generations did. I think the expectations were a little bit different. There's a million reasons for that. Schools, parents, participation trophies, all kinds of good stuff that could happen there. But I think we were all bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, rosy when we went in there, but the expectations might have been a little more realistic. Yeah, I'm going to have to spend more than 2 years before I'm going to get promoted or those kinds of things. But money isn't always, maybe wasn't the motivator when we first went in the market, but it becomes real important as time goes on. Health insurance, stuff like that, absolutely. So, yeah, and those are factors. Good point. Good point on that. Okay, so that's good stuff on how we're viewing the generations and just a little bit this. Brought up just a couple minutes ago was this idea of work-life balance. Work-life balance, and this this means something completely different from maybe how I was raised in the workforce. My first real job I was a lieutenant in the Air Force, and I was running a 250-person jet engine shop, and work-life balance just meant, I don't even know what that meant. But that wasn't a factor. Now it means something completely different. And when we think about work-life balance, what issues come to mind? What does that mean to you, work-life balance? Does that mean you get 3 weeks a year vacation for a spear fishing trip in South America or something like that? Because we've been asked questions like that before, but what do we mean by work-life balance?
We found that flexible work hours.
Flexible work hours? Okay. Okay, so flexible hours is a good thing, and you're actually able to do that, and it works. And that helps people. They're inspired at home. They can manage their life at home. Small children, older parents, they hang around in that. That's a good point. What else could be a work-life balance issue? Yep. We'll give you the microphone there. Yeah.
Maybe my folks. I'm on 24/7, and if I have an idea, I email you at 3 a.m. when I wake up.
Yep.
And I don't expect an answer, but that's just what I'm going to do. And it was really hard for my staff, where they, the whistle blows at 5 on Friday, and nobody checks anything till Monday morning at 9.
Okay.
And I struggle really hard with that. So I've kind of tried to walk it back a little bit, not understanding how can you not check your email all weekend. And so I've
just
tried to
literally flip it off.
Yeah. So I think trying to find.
But their Facebook's open though. Right?
Exactly.
Okay. Right. So that's interesting. So there's a switch we're seeing there in terms of that, and that could be a conflict in some cases. The expectations are different, and there's some Fair Labor Standards Act issues with that too. We're starting to see, depending on how much money they make, you start hitting there, or you getting into overtime. You got to watch that, and especially in this industry where things happen all the time. It never stops. Yep.
I think something as simple as having a access to a gym and being able to leave the office for an hour to work out.
Absolutely, that's a factor too. Is there gym membership, or is there one close by? Is there something where people can do that? A wellness issue. What else might be something? I always think about, like, if they have daycare or something like that on site. That's always nice. But those are a lot of the big ones. Definitely, we're looking for and it's healthy stuff to make us happier on the job and kind of keep us around. So it can be as simple as maybe allowing for an adjustment in the work schedule. Some industries you can't do that though. And I think in this industry there is some adjustments with that, but there's some things you can't do. And in some industries that are kind of like 24/7, people work in the medical field, firefighters, there's no adjustments there. You have to deal with that. And those industries might struggle to attract folks that are looking for this. So work-life balance is kind of a hot button issue, but it gets defined differently by the workplace generations. So kind of digging in a little bit more on this idea of how the workforce generations view the workplace. I got this slide up here, and it shows the workplace generations, and you can see the dates of birth are different on this than what we saw earlier, and that's how this fluctuates. And it's never going to get settled. And some, but there's some consistencies we can draw across from this. So we see issues with work ethic and our veterans group: respect, authority, hard work. Age equals seniority. and company comes first. All right, that's how that works. And my parents were like that, and I got a lot of that from them. You may be like that too, especially if you're sending emails at 3 a.m. You've got that there. Boomers, a lot of them are considered workaholics. They desire quality. They do question authority in some cases. That's being done, and it kind of depends on where they are in that big group of folks, how they were socialized. Some of that group questioned authority a lot, as we saw during the Vietnam era, things like that. Others a little bit less. Gen X, eliminate the task. They talk about get her done. They're self-reliant. They want structure and direction, and they are skeptical. Gen Xers in the house, a little skeptical. Okay, so we see a lot of that, and there is some skepticism, but I want to get this done and get out of here. Give me the answer. And I have students, older students at UCCS, and a lot of times we might talk about theory, and like, that's great. What do I do here? Give me the key. And I get that. So we want to make sure that that's provided for them. And that's a motivational factor. They're super self-reliant. They'll dig in there and find the answer, but that's a challenge. And the Gen Y is like, what's next? What's kind of going on next? Incredible multitaskers, although we've seen some research that multitasking is not a great thing anymore. It ends up being just, you kind of do meh work at a lot of things. That can be so. The idea, tenacity, but we do see great entrepreneurial skill sets from this. Everybody thinks they can have a YouTube video and become a million. No, maybe not. But the idea is that they've seen people do this stuff, and there's a believability that you can be an entrepreneur, have a great product or service, and just do amazingly well. The rest of us that maybe been in the workplace over the years maybe have lost that a little bit. We see you can kind of read obligation, exciting adventure. It's a difficult challenge. It's a contract from our neglected generation. And Gen Y, it's like, so I can do all the other cool things I want to do. That's what I'm looking for. We see the leadership style, direct command and control versus quality. Gen Xers, everyone the same, challenge others, ask why. And then remains to be seen with why yet. There's not a lot of studies on. There are some studies, something I'm actually looking at is what leadership style works best in motivation, and about the only way we can do that is ask surveys and ask them, what do you think? Did you like a transactional, transformational, servant leader? What inspired you? Long-term studies, are they hanging around companies or organizations that use a certain leadership style? We don't have any data on that yet, but it's coming. That's the idea. Communication. This is something that's real interesting. Formal memo. If you get a text from me, okay, it's going to have commas and everything's going to be. That's just how I do it. But you may not get that otherwise. It could be a little bit more email, voicemail, or texting. Rewards and feedback. No news is good news. All the way from money. Gen Xers asking, how am I doing? A lot of times you need that feedback, Gen Xers. And then I want feedback whenever I want it. The push of a button, I'm looking for that. And organizations that are trying to reach on that are building more informal feedback systems. And this is something I saw in corporate. This is kind of an adjustment story for me. We had a very informal feedback system when I was working with Target Corporation. I don't know anything about the retail end, but on the supply chain end, that was something that was really, really pushed. Junior executives were allowed to give feedback, and they would say, hey, can I give you some feedback? And my initial pushback was like, really? You want to give me feedback? That wasn't the right way to do that. Human resources told me right away in that environment. So I had to condition myself for that. I wasn't used to informal feedback systems where people just come at you right now, and they might tell you something good, and they might tell you something bad that maybe you don't want to hear. And they were great at it. They handled it well. I was the one that had to adjust in that environment. So if you've got a system like that and you can encourage informal feedback, they're going to do it anyway, I tell you that. But with your multi-generational workforce, you may have to help your Gen Xers and your Boomers adjust to that, because I could tell you it took some adjustment for me to get used to a junior person who's maybe his team wasn't performing as well as mine was, telling me that I need to adjust something. Really? Yeah, but we worked on it. It was something I had to really condition myself when one of them came up and they said, hey, can I give you some feedback? I'm just like, okay, let's do this, you know. It took a little while. Motivation is a big issue. They talk about being respected, being valued, and working with other bright people. That's critical. Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
I just had a question about that. When you're describing that feedback scenario, are you saying they were giving feedback in an upward direction?
Absolutely, upward, downward, across,
Yeah.
with absolutely no hesitation. That they could come up to a supervisor 1 or 2 levels up and give feedback. We had to tell them they couldn't talk to the general manager in the bathroom. We had to because he didn't like that. They didn't know that, but it was something, it was like one of those unwritten rules, like don't talk to him in the bathroom. Okay, just leave the guy alone. But that was something where we might see an issue there. And then technology. This is in veterans, Hoover Dam. Technology all the way down to it's ethereal, it's intangible. Boomers, it says the microwave. Yeah, I remember the world without the microwave. It was quite a bit different. It definitely changed the workplace. Those are things, but there is a little conflict here in terms of the technology part. We say Gen Y, they may feel like they're superior in terms of technology. Some of us grew up, in workplaces where we didn't have a computer, and then we had computers, and we had to learn everything, and we're really, really good at just grinding stuff out and making it happen, and that may not be appreciated. We may not appreciate their end of it too, but that's something we found is we're a lot closer technology-wise. Yeah, I may not know what Spotify is or whatever, but I can make a computer work. I've learned to do that over the years, and that's there. So those are just some issues in terms of how they view the workplace. And this is another quick chart here we'll look at in terms of leadership challenges and attributes. And I want you to focus in on Xers. We see skeptical again. Xers are just skeptical. They've learned to be that way, and that's okay. Ys are hopeful. We haven't dashed their dreams yet in terms of that, but that's the idea. Boomers are still optimistic. Builders are like, yeah, who's ever the boss, I'm good. That's kind of the idea. View of authority, Xers, unimpressed. We see that. At that point, it's like, the Ys are usually polite. There might be some issues with formality, and that's something I work a lot with my students, is they can get themselves in trouble right away with lack of formality in workplaces. And I coach them to actually do a series, 10 things you need to know before going into your workplace. We actually did a series of this for millennials on, hey, adjusting to your new workplace, don't do this, do this. We had some pretty good things there. That was a good thing. But that's kind of what we see there. You can see the different things in terms of how they lead promotions. If we look over here, kind of look through there, tenure for boomers, survival of the fittest, and then we get into Ys, it's my right. Now that might be a generalization, but that's kind of what we see behind it. In some cases, I have a degree. I should be doing this. I've checked these boxes. I need to be in charge, that kind of thing. And that's where initially you might be taken aback by somebody who says that. And my advice is don't be. That's how this person may have been conditioned. Their parents told them they were always wonderful. Everything was great. So just be careful with that. You just need to spend a little more time with that. You see training, necessary and expected, and this is a big part of development. They're begging for training opportunities, in-house or sending people somewhere. It's a big issue in keeping these folks, is if you can get them trained. And then we see communication at work, different things. This is just a sidelight. This is something I tell students when they go to work for their new boss. You ask them these questions in terms of communication. How should I address you? Good question, isn't it, to ask your boss? How do you like to be contacted? Do you want to be emailed? Do you want to be called? Do you want to text? What do you want? Because we don't know until we ask. And the third most important question I ask them is, ask your boss, how do they like to be interrupted? So they see the heads nod on that. It's a good thing. Do you want me just to come into the office? Do you want me to call first? Because they'll just come in otherwise, and you'll end up ticking off the boss. And I tell a story about this. When I was in corporate, I asked my boss this, and hey, how do you like to be interrupted? And he told me, I don't. So that was the idea behind it. And the students asked me, what does that mean? I said, that means he doesn't want to be interrupted. So unless the building's on fire, handle it. That's what that means. And so that's what we're looking for in that area there. Let's take 5 for a break, and then I'll see where we're at and where we want to go. Good discussions though, guys. Thank you. Thank you.
So, Marathon Industries, give me a breakdown.
It's a B2B company that provides cloud storage for Fortune 500 companies.
Chet, what did the market research turn up?
What? Oh, I Googled them, but the results were weird.
You didn't use the market research database that we spend thousands of dollars a month on and that you were specifically trained to use.
I quit. This job is different than I thought it would be.
Stop. Does this situation look familiar? A new type of worker has entered the workforce. They're called Millennials, and they're terrible. Today, I'm going to teach you all about this new breed of worker so you can avoid misunderstandings in which you feel the need to fire them immediately. In the first reimagination we just saw, Mary makes the classic mistake of not reassuring Chet while offering overflowing amounts of praise.
Chet, you were so smart to use Google. That's the perfect way to start the research. You're so smart.
Great job.
So the conference call is scheduled for 10:30, so that we're on the same page. Let's do a pre-call about 9:30 a.m.
I don't understand. Noodles in the morning.
9:30.
9:30?
Sheryl Sandberg here isn't aware time exists before 10:30 a.m. To her generation, there's a mysterious dead zone after 4 a.m. and before they stroll into work 40 minutes late with their iced coffee. So take that into consideration for scheduling.
That's very difficult for me.
Fine, I'll take the call myself.
Oh, thank you.
Nailed it.
Here's that report that you asked for.
Thanks.
Morgan did exactly what was asked of her. Nothing more, nothing less. She expects a raise and promotion.
Thanks. Junior Executive Manager of Data Consulting.
Is that better than Assistant Manager of Junior Accounts?
Yes.
Oh my God, thank you. I'm gonna go call my parents.
Now you're getting it.
I need to take work off tomorrow for a mental health day.
Did you know millennials can actually be exceptionally creative with reasons why they need to miss work? These eccentric excuses are normal to them, and they will be to you too.
Sure, that's a normal thing.
Hi, I know I only get 10 days paid vacation, but that wouldn't count a 3-week Argentinian surf spirit quest, right?
No, why would it?
Oh.
Ugh. Why don't you go home early today?
That's it. Any questions? Why even hire millennials? Oh, right. Well, millennials comprise 19% of the workforce. If none of them worked and their parents supported them, it would cripple our economy and China would take over. So unfortunately, it's your civic duty to employ them. Trust us, we want to fire them all too, but we can't.
That's the idea in terms of trying to keep this lighthearted and not take ourselves too seriously. All right, so before the break, we were talking about how the different workplace generations viewed the work center. One of the issues that's come up a lot, and I've seen this with my students, I've seen some research on this, is this idea of competition in the workplace, a competitive work environment. Now, organizations, companies need to be competitive because if they're not going to be around long. But competition has almost become a bad word with this workplace generation. I'm seeing some nodding. What do you mean by that? Go ahead. Let's go with that one first. Yeah.
So I'm the manager of the sales department.
Mm-hmm. There's a competition industry right there. Yeah.
Yes, and I have 4 millennials on my team. I have 2 baby boomers and 1 Gen Xer. And I definitely know for a fact that my millennial people do not think that competition is a good thing. I mean, they flat out tell me they don't aspire to be competitive. They don't want to hurt someone's feelings. They don't want to give the wrong impression. They don't want there to have this sensation of like, you know, we're competing against each other. Okay. So I've been told that. So in the sales world, that's a really different way of operating. And in fact, I'm looking for ways as a manager to understand, and that's why I was really excited to hear about the motivation side.
So we'll try to dig in on that a little bit here, but that's something we've seen. Did they say why they thought it was a bad thing, or just curious? Or
they will tell me, you know, I'm not a competitive person.
That's great in a job interview to say that, by the way. Yeah. So,
well, and keep in mind, some of these people, you know, were hired based on the things that I feel like are the reasons we do hire millennials, that we've looked beyond, you know, looking for a certain thing that maybe we used to look for. So I think it's interesting that once we get them in the workforce, we may not really have the skills as managers or leaders to know how to take them from that first, you know, step of being, hey, now you work here, and now you're telling me you're not competitive, which we kind of need you to be in sales. Right. So it's again, it's another conflict. It feels like a lot of conflict.
So something happened to that word competition. It became a bad word, and it was an okay word before. But what do you think happened with this workplace generation where competition became a bad thing? What happened there? Go ahead. We'll get you. Mike there. Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of, I don't have any kids, but my sister has kids, and I was like, who won? Nobody won the game. We don't play like that anymore. Okay. Everybody gets a trophy. And I was like, what the?
So there's some of that definitely where participation kind of things. I remember coaching T-ball when we didn't keep score. The parents would ask, who won? It's like, I don't know. It's 100 degrees out there and the kids are chasing butterflies. You know, I'm glad it's over. The kids were just asking, do we get snacks yet? That kind of thing. So there's a point in time where maybe they came off no competition to competition. Maybe that's not there. And that's interesting. Any other ideas where that may have happened, where we kind of lost that? Because, you know, competition we thought was a good thing. It hones us. It makes us stronger. You got to do it. And what some of the research that we've seen is a lot of ideas with competition is they saw bad things happen to their parents on the job in terms of competitive environments. And in competition, and especially if we've been raised in the last, if your experience is just the last 20 years or so, what kind of stuff have we seen from leaders, organizations in terms of competition? We saw Volkswagen just go through this thing recently where they fixed their cars so they would pass emissions tests when they didn't. You know, is it to stay competitive? So we saw that we just went through the nastiest general election we've ever had in terms of competition. So there's these things out there, and there's a lot of bad flags with it. So it's almost like we need to come up with another word, or we need to redefine it as leadership. But when they see that or they hear that this is a competitive work environment, like, psh, I'm out. That I've seen that before. I don't want to have anything to do with it. Let's pass it down there.
I'm kind of confused by this, but maybe me talking it through will bring some clarity to it. I am a millennial, and my whole life all I've known is competition. And I think that the generation behind me is probably 10 times even worse. Like what we were talking about earlier, how you're programmed to, you should know that you're going to go to Stanford.
Gen X's fault.
No, I mean like the people younger than me.
Okay.
So, you know, it's you're applying to scholarships. You were constantly competing for high, like, extracurricular activities. Who could get the best scholarship, who could get into the best school, who could get the better internship so that you could get the better career. So perhaps once we finally do have a career, we're kind of done with
That'll
that,
go away,
tapped
maybe.
out with that competition aspect. But for me, it's all I've known, so it's maybe that's just a personal thing.
It might be, and it could be it sounds like you raised in a pretty competitive environment and you enjoyed that kind of thing. So so it is a generalization that we've seen, we have seen that as an issue. It's just, I will tell you, it's a word you got to be careful with because it can have a negative. We'll have competitions on campus. There's an essay competition we'll have through our ethics initiative. And some people will just stay away from it. It's like we'll say, you would be great at this. This would be something you would be really, really wonderful doing. And it's like, it's a competition. I don't want to do that. I don't want, my friends on the other side, I don't want them to lose, that kind of thing. So that's a concern. Question here, yeah.
I think there's a difference in maybe competition from a business standpoint as opposed to maybe a sports or standpoint, meaning that you mentioned things about parents being laid off and so forth, or seeing their grandparents maybe had this job and a pension, their parents don't, and everybody's trying to be more competitive. Is it maybe two different kinds of competitive?
Yeah, it might be. So, and I'm going to restate the question. We didn't get the mic to you the whole time, but the idea that competition may be growing up in with sports or academic competition versus when they get into a job situation. There might be, it might be two different things to them. And that I think that's kind of the point right there is the word may mean something completely different. We might think of, competition, we have to be competitive to exist. It's a given, like a front door or a parking place. You got to have it versus something you can't opt out of. And maybe they could, maybe they had a bad experience in team sports or something like that. So I think it's incumbent upon us as leaders to maybe define that or redefine that in terms of something that's not the same. And so that's something we want to look at in terms of that. But we use this term a lot, competitive work environment, and we'll see people run from that. So good points, absolutely. But it is, some people might look at that, hey, I've done this my whole life. Others, that's a bad word. Competition, that sounds like overtime or something. Yeah, it's one of those we don't want. So we say it's viewed by many millennials. We say parents got burned by these work environments, and what they've seen in a lot of cases, it's brought the worst out in people. This is something that I have seen in a relatively short time in academia, and this is just, it's a generalization. There is some empirical data to back it up, but this workplace generation might cheat more than others have academically. We've seen that. There's a million reasons why, but as the heat gets turned up, they might be willing to pull that switch a little bit more. And then schools, Mean Girls Club, whatever, all kinds of stuff are going on, what we've read about or heard about, these things are there. So there is some issues with this word or with the concept of it. So as leaders, we might need to redefine that, or maybe show them that it is a reality. And over time, I think it will wear off, but right now, that's something that we're concerned about. So after all this, after you've looked at this, you still want to hire millennials? Well, we saw in the video, you gotta do it. So it's something that we're going to need to do. And in this case, we don't have a choice as we're seeing this labor force change out. We are, just a couple things, the boomer generation is hanging on longer and longer. I saw one article recently, they said, what should you do with your boomers that don't want to retire? And they say, never let them retire. They can work into their 70s, but you find out a lot of them, their parents are still alive. And they might need to care for their parents, and you might need to adjust their schedule. But in some cases where we had people in the past retire in their 60s, and they were replaceable, some people that have worked in a company 30, 40 years longer, you can't replace them. You literally cannot plug in a cog to take their place. And you need to ease, if they're thinking about retirement, you might say, hey, would you please hang on? We can work you half-time. We can do something. We need to keep you around. It's something that is a challenge. Now, they might go into a different role than they did before, but that mentoring ability can be lost on this new workplace generation if they're not connected. And a lot of times folks that have been in the workplace that long, they're not even talking to the millennials at all. There might be 2 or 3 work layers in between them. So that skill set is really, really critical. But we are going to have to bring the millennials in. They are there. You're already working with them now. So that's what's going on. All right. So should say issues small businesses face. I put fact on there, spell checker didn't get that. 56% of small business employers experience difficulty finding candidates with the right job experience. And then we looked at that again in terms of experience. As a small business owner, I have really gotten to the point now, especially in small businesses, you need people that can do a little bit of everything. It's not as well defined. And if you're looking for that experience in this workplace generation, you're not going to find it. People haven't worked in these environments anymore where they've been in an office and they've had to do multiple things. So I'm not going to find it. I need to find the right fit. And so it's not there. You're not going to find it. They don't have that workplace experience. They haven't developed soft skills, things that we're looking for maybe in those jobs. So you're going to have to provide that. You better look for fit. Are they good team members? Things that the behavior-based interviews will reveal in doing that. And then the other thing is small businesses, they have a difficult time finding candidates with the right skills, education, or training, and you may not be able to find that either. In a lot of jobs, and probably in this industry, you'll see you got to have a bachelor's degree just to get in the door, to even be looked at in some cases, and that may not necessarily be a good divider. You might want to look elsewhere. And in our session we did with that we did for millennials and their adjustment to the workplace, some of them didn't have degrees and they've excelled. They're amazing. They didn't want to go to school. They wanted to learn what they needed to learn and then go out and do things. So the fit might be an issue. So this is something small businesses face. As the economy grows, most of the jobs are created by small businesses. It's usually not the big corporations that do that. And there's a gap here. So they're being challenged on what they need to do to provide the skill sets to make this new workplace generation successful, but they're not going to get in the traditional human resource search type of banks that they're using and just looking for skill sets. All right, so that's something we're definitely challenged with in terms of it. They're good for small business, they just may not have the skill sets you're looking for. All right, so good things that we definitely have seen from millennials is they bring fresh ideas and fresh perspectives from your workplace. Sometimes really, really fresh, things that you may not have expected to see or hear at all. Has anybody gotten an experience with that where you've seen that? You've gotten just like something you never thought of that somebody came in and gave you? So we get some head nods on that, definitely. So that's a good thing. They haven't been in the work area before, and sometimes that's a big plus. If your customers, if your viewers, your listeners are millennials, it's a good idea to have them in there. They know what they're looking for. They know what they want to hear, they want to see. We found this to be really, really a good deal right now. I've been talking to some folks in Colorado Springs that are in the real estate market. And this market's changing completely right now. Just a year or so ago, 2 years ago, it was completely different. The real estate agents wanted to get buyers because there was lots of homes for sale. Now you want sellers. That's changed completely. And the people who are buying the homes are millennials. How do you approach them? Kind of what's going on in that environment. And the folks that we talked to said that the normal things that they have done to market homes, when they show somebody a home, they talk about neighborhood, how close they are to the schools, things like that. They already know all that. They know that already. 80% of their marketing has already been done through social media. So they're having to change how they adjust this completely. And to get that, they need to get a millennial perspective in real estate. They don't want to work in real estate. For some of the reasons we talked about sales jobs, we're not seeing people that want to go into the real estate industry. They've seen that be a bad industry for a long time. And now we need that perspective. So they're going to have to maybe look at changing how that market is structured if they want to be successful in getting them. Let's say they say to customers their own age, millennials bring familiarity in that environment. If you've got sales jobs where they're dealing with folks in the same workplace generation, there is a familiarity. And we know that sometimes if you're working in sales and you're talking to people out of your workplace generation, it can be a challenge in terms of that, bridging that gap in terms of communicating with them. And this is something that we've seen that's really, really interesting. It sounds obvious, but you say young employees can help generate marketing strategies. Absolutely. but in terms of it's usually the free stuff that they're really, really good at. And that's in terms of the social media sites. What's going on? Where are the internet communities that are talking about your organization? They're linked in to what's going on, and they've got a good idea of what's working and what isn't. That ends up moving the ball down the field quite a bit. We've seen with a lot of industries that's helped. And again, this is the free stuff. It's managing that, reaching out to those groups, finding out what's working and what isn't. And they can spot the phonies right away. People that are, like we were talking before about paid audience, people sitting there. You got people who are paid from companies to punch information in on sites, to put reviews in. They can spot the phonies right away. I can't do that. And I've hired tech people, search engine optimization specialists. It's a skill set I don't have, and they know it naturally. And there isn't like a lot of training for it. They've just done it and they get it. So that's a real plus for a lot of industries, is the perspective and what they can bring in there. We talked a little bit about this in terms of before, this idea of technical skills. Now, I can tell you, I grew up, at the time I didn't know it, but it was a really, really non-tech environment. The first job I had in the Air Force when I was a newly commissioned second lieutenant was running a 250-person jet engine shop. We had one word processor in the shop. We did everything by typewriters, things like that. Within 5-6 years, everybody had computers. Now, those computers, we couldn't start them up without boot disks, if anybody remembers that kind of thing. Yeah, there wasn't enough memory in the computer to start it, so you had to have and it was a real floppy disk to get the thing going. So perspective on technology might be different. I appreciate it. I know how to make it work, but I don't know how to make it sing and dance. I don't know how to do that. So younger workers, they may have grown up with technology. Kids it seems like they have they can just grab something remote and they're just punching keys right away. It's something that they're good at. So if they've done this, it's more natural. It isn't another tool. We just rolled like Windows 10 out. I still hate Windows 8. They've already got 10 out. So that's something nobody really thinks about. That 10's automatically better. It's like, no, it isn't. But that's what we're dealing with. So being able to just pick up and implement technology smoothly, easily, that's a huge plus for an organization. I got to grind through it. I'll learn how to do it. Self-taught, most of the Windows programs, but that's easy stuff compared to this. So the idea of those folks being able to mentor legacy employees, we'll call them that instead of older employees, that's a great thing, and they can use that quite a bit, and that's how you build leaders there. You're a technology leader in the organization. You're somebody that's doing some good things there. And then in terms of cost reduction, this is a reality too, is millennials tend to have less work experience, and so they may work for less. They will. In some cases, first job, things like that. You got to keep them, but that's something that you may look for. So you get it's a reality. People will work for less, and if that's something we're looking for. But they say, yeah, costs are not the only consideration when hiring a new employee. Fit, you may be looking for that technology, that savvy person for that job, but the cultural fit, the things we talked about before with behavior-based interviews, you definitely want to go ahead and hit that there. I worked in training for a lot of years, and I found shifting with training and providing that, this workplace generation seems to pick that up quite a bit easier. And we talk about they're a blank slate. If they haven't seen this before, maybe they haven't gotten jaded to it yet, or the next training issue, or the next new leadership style. But that's something that is a plus in being able to do that. And as we go to more online training, more of that type of delivery tool, these workers have grown up with that in the schools. It's something that they've done. They're willing to do. They're going to go ahead and pick that up. This is where the push between experience and fit is there. I may want somebody for a job because they've got a certain skill set that they bring to it. But sometimes old habits are hard to break. Kind of the been there, done that kind of thing. You may not want that, and you may be willing to trade the experience for that. And the idea that they can learn the way that you do things, that seems to be proven to be a lot better in getting those things done and finding that fit. And then the idea that we saw earlier in one of the slides, that meaningful work was really, really a critical thing. This is important across the workplace generations, but we use this term a lot of being engaged in work and engagement surveys. You've probably taken a boatload of them. Okay, so the idea behind it, let me jump ahead here. This is what we saw from career success. So important for our millennials, they said, millennials, they say at 30%, say meaningful work as being critical. Non-millennials who manage millennials, only 11%. So the disconnect there. And then in terms of pay, we see that being a factor for our non-millennials over the millennials in terms of career success. Sense of accomplishment, we see the jump there. And then, high responsibility in terms of leadership. Millennials who want to lead don't see that as being as big of a factor. So there's some disconnects there in terms of that. So terms that we've used a lot in the past in like competition, engagement might mean something different. So as leaders, we've got to make sure we define them and that they're that we're all on the same page and that it is important in those areas. All right. And we got one thing I wanted to talk about here, and if we can go ahead and roll this video, and I'll talk over it. But this is the idea. We talk about collaborative work environments, and what that should mean. There is some music to that. Collaborative work environments can be pretty simple. We can get the sound up on that. This is a company called FastCap, and we're seeing here they're a production company.
And we want each one of our people to become leaders, so we allow them to lead the morning meeting every morning, which induces and creates the culture that we want. So in the morning, we meet together in what we call our sandbox. It's a circle. It's kind of a square that we have marked out, and everybody stands within that square, respecting the time that we have together. And that's where we convey all the important things about FastCap to our people on a daily basis. Things such as how much product did we sell the day before and how much did we ship?
Okay, so sales for yesterday were 29,633. Team B did 16,000, Team A did 13,000.
We review the mistakes we made.
Only one mistake, forgot the back order pocket chisels.
We review the improvements we made. We actually stand around where people have made significant contributions to saving time and money, and we look at those things and we evaluate it and we celebrate it because we believe we teach it, we measure it, and then we celebrate it. We call it TMC, and we do that over and over and over again. We also review safety board issues.
Nobody's supposed to be within 5 feet of the forklift while it's operating.
We also discuss the topics that we learned from the historical figures that we've studied in the past because, yes, we even study history.
Winston Churchill said these words, act in the day.
Because we believe that inputting to people and growing people is the most powerful thing we can do. If we have people that are engaged in world affairs, that understand historical principles, those people can make good and sound decisions on a daily basis, and they make a much greater contribution to the output of our company as a result of that. So we input into people. We believe the number one goal at FastCap is to grow people. Just some of the principles that we study at FastCap are, the purpose of FastCap is to Toyota is always looking for ways to make things faster. Our job title is because our goal is to improve the process every day. All we ask from all of our people is to make a 2-second improvement every day. Everything of value comes after much hard work. These are some of the 16 principles that FastCap believes in, and we teach it on a daily basis. Whether we're studying our videos online that show us how our products work so our people are up to speed on the details and nuances of our own product, or whether or not we're looking at historical figures such as Thomas Jefferson or George Washington. We're always learning in a constant mode of learning, and that's what the morning meeting creates. A place where we can learn and grow as a team. We understand the values, the objectives, the goals, and we go to meet those on a daily basis. And the morning meeting is the way that happens. People say to me, how could you spend that much time and money in a morning meeting with all those people standing around from 15 minutes to an hour? And my response is, how can I afford not to? Because I have the most engaged, self-managed, self-disciplined people that believe in what FastCap is trying to achieve, believe in serving the customer, believe in only giving value-added activity. This is what FastCap is all about. And we do that in the morning meeting, and that's why FastCap is successful. And that's how other companies can also gain this powerful culture of transformation, which FastCap nurtures every day. That's the FastCap way. Welcome to the morning meeting.
All right, so we see how this is a definitely multi-generational workforce, very, very flat organization structure, but the culture is built around it. Most of the people are doing the same jobs year after year, but because they own their processes and they're really, really engaged, they're building a good structure there, and they're one of the leaders in this field. So we look at them a lot. There's another video. They also let like dogs run around in there. They have dogs in there and all kinds of stuff. And everybody stands. There's no chairs in the place. It's a real interesting environment. So it's a simple process, a stand-up meeting in the morning, but it gets everybody around that. And the idea of meaningful work and growing people's right at the top of their list. So that's something we're looking for companies and organizations to do this to hang on to folks. All right. So kind of wrapping things up, we want to have a few minutes for some questions. But these are some things to think about. A lot of companies think they're attracting millennials, but they're surprised when they leave after a short period of time. We're going to talk a little bit more this afternoon in the second session about that. But that's just something to kind of think about. We have this section here as part of our training. We call it aha moments. And did you have an aha moment today where a light bulb went off or something like, oh, yeah, something along those that really popped up? Anybody have one of those today they want to share? An aha moment? Maybe we had a lot of them. That's okay. If we didn't have any today, a question there, okay.
Sorry. I guess for me, I wouldn't say it's aha in the sense of, oh, I didn't know these things. Mm-hmm. As I said earlier, I have a millennial daughter, so I am to blame.
You're in the front lines of the battle.
Yeah. But my moment of aha is that as a leader here, it's my responsibility to find ways to connect that might be difficult for me, but I'm the leader. They're my team.
Yep.
So it's my responsibility to make that reach.
Absolutely.
And
Okay.
that's probably my moment.
Good. Any other ones today in terms of aha moments? How about any questions that you might have on what we've talked about? Anything come to mind or something that we didn't cover? Because we had a lot of questions, and that's okay if you don't have any more now. We're another one here. Yep.
Do you have any data on what percentage of millennials are currently unemployed?
They are higher than the national average, and they are higher than the other workplace generations. And that's been consistent as new workplace generations have emerged. You know, you're struggling to get into the marketplace. That's there. But unemployment's really gone down in the last, year-ish. So there are jobs available. They might be more underemployed, but it is a higher percentage than it is the Xers and the Boomers. But it's not like remarkably high. It's, 1 or 2 points. And it depends on the job market too. But in this part of the country, the economy's doing fairly well. We're not seeing there's nothing out of whack right now because of that. Because even if they leave a job, they can find a job right away. People are hiring. But that's a good question on that. All right. Any other ones? Okay, good. Okay, we'll wrap up here. So real quick, I'd like to kind of go over what we talked about. First thing we went through was the workforce generations, who they are. The one thing I want you to remember about that is there aren't real clear dividing lines, and people can be kind of all over the place in this area. We're making some generalizations about millennials and the other workplace generations, but there's no scientific lines that say, hey, verily, you were born in 1960, you're this. So don't get too hung up on that. We spent a little bit of time talking about who the millennials are, kind of what they think about things. There are some generalizations about their feelings. But I think the one thing to take out of that is they are not anti-work. They're not anti-business. They actually can have some pretty good entrepreneurial and tech skills that you can use. That's a plus there. Are they good for your team? Yeah, they are. They bring a lot to the table. They need to be honed and trained a little bit differently. They might need to be developed. And even things like words like competition or engagement might mean something different. That's something for us to work on as leaders. And then finally, we talked a little bit about some motivation strategies, things that we found have worked over time. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody's time today. Great audience. Appreciate all the questions. And I think we're done here. Thanks. All right, good.